Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. MC-Mura here, and in today's video I'm gonna make a Street Fighter 5 tier list. Now obviously, like I said in one of the community posts earlier, I don't think it's actually possible for a single person to make a tier list because it does require you to have a multiple perspective. Obviously there is a little bit of bias here and there, but I'm gonna try to be as objective about it as possible. I'm seeing so many tiers lists being thrown around, so hey, why not just throw my opinion around with them, right? And I generally do think this season is probably the most balanced the game have been, but you know, there is of course gonna be a best character and the weakest character. And to start off with, the character that I do think is probably the best character in the game, and that is Mr. Rashid. I know that generally Rashid and Cammy are considered to be like super duper strong character. Even in my video where I said like top 5 characters who are likely to be really strong, I had Cammy, and I was almost certain that Cammy is a very high tier character. Cammy is very strong and Rashid is very strong as well. These two characters are amazing. They have so many strengths, very little weaknesses. The reason that I am putting Rashid ahead of Cammy is that I do think that Rashid probably have less bad matchups. Now that I have been playing Cammy for a little bit, I see that she does struggle versus some characters. There's not that many characters that I will say beat Cammy, but there are some matchups where I do feel that she struggles in, and for that reason I do think that she is second place. She's still a very good character, but I don't think she like wins every single matchup. Rashid, I am not sure if he actually have a losing matchup. The one that I can think of a little bit is maybe Gill. Maybe I heard some people say Nash, although I'm not sure. I've seen some people say Ed, although I'm not sure, but overall Rashid probably have no bad matchups. Like, he doesn't have a matchup where you are forced to change characters, right? And that is very valuable, especially on these two characters. I think these two are the only ones where you should never consider switching characters. Everyone else I do think have matchups where you will need to switch. And for my number 3, and I think this might surprise some people, but I do rate him very highly, and that is Zeku. And it's kind of the same reasoning really. I do think that Zeku, like Cammy and Rashid, to a lesser extent, because he doesn't have that many winning matchups, like he doesn't dominate characters, but he also doesn't get dominated by anyone. Zeku have a fighting chance versus almost every single character in the game, and that is honestly very good. That is very good and very reliable, and you have to really appreciate that. And of course, having the option to have a young and an old form makes him very malleable. You can do whatever you want with this character, so that is very good. Next up, I have of course our boy Akuma. Where is Akuma? Akuma is still obviously one of the best characters. The versatility is still there, the damage is still there, the set play is still there. He lost the corner carry, which is kinda, you know, he lost his corner side switch, and this one does kinda hurt him a little bit, but I don't think it is big enough to actually like drop him completely off of the top 5 list. I think he's still a very strong character overall. The options are still there. V-Shift doesn't really negatively affect him. When you really think about it, like, Akuma doesn't lose much because of V-Shift. Like, what do you V-Shift, you know, regarding Akuma? Not that much. Like, at least Cammy, maybe the EX dive kick, Zeku, maybe some of the Bush and Flame mix-ups, you can see them getting negatively affected by V-Shift. Nothing really for Akuma, it just adds one more defensive option to him, so that is good, and his game plan is entirely reliant on hit confirms, footsies, neutral, whiff punishment, all of that. So I do think he's still a very strong character. Number 5 in my opinion is Miss Karin Kanzuki. Again, one of the characters who completely dominates the neutral, have no weaknesses whatsoever when you really think about it. Karin only loses to characters that she can't get in on. So her only bad matchups are characters like Poison or Minat or etc. Right? But otherwise she beats she decisively beats fireball characters, have very good pressure, very good neutral, really awesome defense. She does not lose anything to V-shift, and I do think hit confirming is really important now, so for that I do think she's actually really nice. I also have a couple of other characters, but I'm gonna make them in the top of the A list. I do think these are the top 5, while I do have to say that if I had to rank them, like if I had to make a tier above, let's actually make that and make this an S+. I do think these 3 probably belong there. Not because they are so much better than the others, it's just because they typically don't have bad matchups. Like Akuma have bad matchups. Akuma have matchups where he struggle, he still have his total amount of tools that makes him viable in every match, but you know, he's not 5-5 in every matchup. And the same for Karen, she does struggle versus characters like Poison, like Minette, so I can't in good conscience say that Karen and Rashid are the same, right? It is hard for me to say that. And since we made it into S tier, I'm gonna say Balrog is S tier, obviously. Again, this is a character who have very little bad matchups now. His safety is ridiculous, damage output is very high, high tier robbery. Balrog is incredible at this moment. I think it's very hard for any character to say that they beat Balrog, especially since he is again one of the characters who kinda only have to gain with V-shift. You can say that you can V-shift his dash punches, but now that they are -4, you know, you kinda have to. Like, it went from something like that's an option that you can do to it being that is the only option you have. And that is very powerful. And also you have to consider, out of all of the tackle characters, so if we're saying Balrog, Bison, Alex, whatever, characters who have tackle style attacks, like dash punches, etc, 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 he is the only character who can feint. Because he have his V skill 1, he can actually feint it, and then he gets a crush counter punish on you. So he's a very strong character. So I do think Balrog is up there. I do think that Gill is up there as well. Obviously, Gill still have ridiculous, no, you know, his neutral is still king. He have very good matchups across the board. Very few characters actually does well against Gill. V-shift didn't really hurt his fireball game. His corner pressure and his pressure in general is a little bit weaker, I will admit that. But again, his neutral is so strong to the point where it does not really matter that much. I do think he's still an awesome character. And I'm gonna follow it up with Julian. Julian, I feel, is still a superb character. He did fall off a little bit, I do think so, because Aegis took a big hit. And it is undeniable that it is an effective nerf, right? Like, his robbery with Aegis was super hardcore, and he did lose a bit of his comeback factor with that, but honestly, Julian is still Julian. He still have all of the awesome tools. It's just that his comeback is a little bit weaker, and honestly, that is significant. Like previous patch, I would have said put Julian in this place, but for him to fall into the backside of the top 10, I do think that is, to me, that is logical. I know a lot of people rate Abigail really highly. I don't rate him that highly. So in this spot, the character that I actually had in my previous top 5, and that is Colleen. This character is ridiculous. This character is actually super slept on. This is the most single slept on character in the game, in my opinion. Colleen is a super duper uber character. Her neutral is amazing. Her whiff punishment is amazing. The pressure is really good. She is super safe on almost everything. And she have an incredible V-trigger. It is a little bit weaker, and I would say V-trigger is what had her in the top 5 previously for me. But now that her V-trigger is kinda neutered, it is still really good. You just don't get to abuse it as much now. Like, your opponent can set out the V-trigger, so that is effective, but still the character is super good in my opinion. And if I had to add one final character to this top 10 list, and this might surprise some people, I know this pick might surprise some people, but I am a solid believer that this character is ridiculous. And that is Sakura. Sakura almost have no flaws. She only loses to heavy zoning, so I do think she does have issues with maybe Gill, maybe a little bit of Sagat, but this character have incredible walk speed, incredible defense, stupid high damage output, stupid high hit confirms, absurd jump-ins, really good anti-airs, really good shimmies. She is awesome. Sakura is such an underrated character, and I do think she belongs in the top 10. That is my personal opinion. So these characters for me make the top 10 in the game as it is. I do think all of them are really good and really ridiculous. Now let's start with the characters who are outside of the top 10. And the first one to me will be Bison. I do think Bison is very strong character. Bison is a character who have a really good amount of matchup spread, right? Like Bison does really well versus so many characters. But I do think he kinda struggles versus the guys above. I can see Rashid being hard for him. I know Cammy is hard for him. Balrog, I heard a lot of Bison players don't like it. I do think Karen probably beats him. So he does kinda have some issues. Obviously struggled a little bit versus grapplers as well. So he is very good character, but he have matchups where I would recommend switching off. Right, and that's what you see the top Bison player doing. If you look at someone like Problem X, you will see him switching characters in some matchups. So he is very good, but he's not invincible, you know. The next up character to me is Ryu. Ryu's very good this season. I do think he's a very good character. He's very solid. Like Bison, he does have really good matchup spread. Ryu does well versus most of the casts now. He does have some really hard matchups, but otherwise I do think he does really well. And now Ryu has the damage output to fight through his bad matchups, and this is a really big deal. Previously, in the previous season, I will put Poison up there and let me explain why. But in the previous season, Poison was with these guys, right? She was really high tier. Poison, I played Poison since the day she came out, right? Poison had bad matchups. Don't think that Poison didn't have like hard matchups. She did have some really hard fights, but she had damage output, and that damage output allowed her to fight the hard matchups. Like if, for example, Poison struggles versus Cammy, this is one of her worst matchups. But because Poison can deal so much damage, even though if she's losing, she could make few right choices and get the victory. And that is what Ryu have now. Ryu have insane damage output, and that allows him to fight through the bad matchups. Like yeah, he does have good Oki now. He does have really high damage output. He might get dominated the entire match, but he can win with an opening or two. And that is huge in Street Fighter V. Poison, of course, is still a character, is really solid. She is awesome. She does struggle a little bit versus the guys above, in my opinion. Cammy is a very hard matchup. I do think Rashid is kind of difficult. Zeku's fair. Akuma is... I think she wins. She beats Karen. She does lose to Balrog now. She loses to Gill, Julian. I'll say even. Does well versus Colleen and Sakura. Loses heavily to Bison and now is 5-5 with Ryu. So she does decent versus the high tiers. But again, when you lose badly to Cammy, which is probably the most important character in tournament, that is difficult, right? That to me, that is really difficult. Like Cammy and Rashid are the characters you don't want to get bodied by to have strong tournament viability. And this is the same issue with Bison actually. Bison that have a really good matchup spread, but having a bad matchup versus Cammy, that is bad. Like that forces him to switch. And I do think Poison is kind of the same boat. Next up, we are gonna have an interesting choice. I do think Sis is still a really strong character. Obviously, Sis lost a lot, but I do think the character is still really good. The axe kick pressure, I think it's still really good. I don't think the pressure of the axe kick have died. It's just that it's not as rewarding as it once was. It is harder for Sis to actually do really good damage, but the pressure and the annoyance of the axe kick is still really good. It's just that the reward is lessened a little bit. But of course he still has the damage. The health nerf kinda hurt him, I won't lie, and V-Shift really hurt the V-Trigger too, but I do think still Sis is a very very strong character. Who is next? And I am... So I am a little bit conflicted on these three characters. I am not sure on their placements, but I will say Abigail, Ed, and Sagat. You can kinda switch them around in this place, but I think all three of them are right around the same tier in my opinion. Ed, Abigail, Sagat, and let's put Minat there as well. I do think all four of these characters can kinda be interchangeable in this range. Here is the thing. Abigail does really well against many of the cast, but I do think losing his jumping or losing his anti-air is actually a really big deal. I don't think many people knows how to fight against Abigail right, and you'll see many of the tiers list being super emotional. Like if you see any of the Japanese tier list, they will put Abigail as super high tier because Itabashi wrecks everyone, and that is but the Japanese generally play super respectful, like they don't jump, but him losing the jab anti-air is a big deal. Like it is such a big deal, and he wasn't the best before, so I'm not sure why would he be the best now. He didn't really get any positive change, and I don't think V-Shift helped him either, so I don't know. Ed is an interesting character. I think Ed is very strong now. I think he is a really strong character at the moment. He did turn out to be more stable than Falk. I expected Falk to be a little bit better, and I do think Falk could be in the same boat. But for now, Ed does seem to be the more tournament viable one of the twins. He does have better offense, he does have better rushdown. His pressure now is really good. His damage output is kinda ridiculous, so he is a really good character. Sagat is ridiculous this season. The thing about Sagat, when you really look at the matchups above, if you look at the S and the S plus tier, outside of Balrog, Sagat does well or beat every single character. He does well versus Sakura, he does well versus Colleen, he does well versus Julian, does well versus Gill, kinda struggle a little bit versus Karen on Balrog. He's good versus Akuma, he's good versus Zeku, he's good versus Kami, and he's good versus Rashid. Sagat does well versus the entirety of the top tiers, and that is incredible. Like if you want to talk about a character having strong tournament viability, that's the one. Yeah, he does have his bad matchups like versus Balrog, like Bison. These might be bad matchups, but again, he does have an awesome matchup spread versus the top tiers, and that's what really matters, especially when it comes to tournament play. This is what really matters in my opinion. Minat is kind of the same thing. I do think Minat is a very strong character, but I also don't see her as being the top character. I do think Minat, like a lot of people think Minat is super good because of V-Shift, right? But the thing about Minat is that she doesn't punish hard. So even she's the type of character that if she doesn't have V-Trigger, she doesn't really punish hard. And Minat, like it or not, Minat is reliant on V-Trigger comebacks. Like she's one of the characters who can find it she can find it very difficult to make a comeback outside of her V-Trigger one, right? So because she doesn't punish hard outside, even if she V-shifted, she doesn't punish hard. And she does rely on his 3 bars V-Trigger. I do think for both of these reasons that she is an A tier. She's still a very good character, but I don't think she is quite in the tiers above. That is at least my opinion. And finally, I will say G at the end of this tier. I think G is very good. Obviously, he did lose a little bit. Or he did lose a lot. Like the nerfs to G's fireball is actually really significant. His neutral is a lot weaker, and the V-Trigger is weaker, especially the damage output on the command grab, right? Like the fact that the command grab scales now in combos, so he doesn't get as much damage as he used to. That is the biggest change that I felt actually playing against G, and the fireball, of course. He does have V-Shift, and V-Shift is very good on G, but also he does rely on his V-Trigger for comebacks. So I do think he's still a very good character. I think everyone in both of these characters, and on all these 3 tiers, everyone here can win a tournament, but it's just that G, I feel like, is a little bit nerfed. He's still top 15, top 20, but a little bit weaker. And now, actually, I wanna call this A minus. I don't think it is B tier because I don't think these characters are significantly worse, but I do think they struggle a little bit more. And at the top of B A minus, I would put Birdie. This character slept on. Birdie is a really good character who's actually really underrated in my opinion. He does have his issues. He does have his problems, but he's still a very good character, especially in a season where neutral is more important than ever. Birdie, you will feel that he's weaker if you like to play a Rago, YOLO style Birdie. If you play a more neutral based Birdie, he's actually really good. In the same vein, I also think Falk is amazing. Like I said earlier, I expected Falk to outperform Ed, and so far she is performing really well. Maybe because the character isn't played as much, so we don't see that much of her. Again, I don't understand why Falk is the type of character that never actually get to see the sun, pretty much. But I do think she's actually pretty nice. I think she's really good in my opinion. Vega is a really underrated character. Vega is a really underrated character. He's one of these characters who you will have everyone tell you like, oh, Vega sucks. Why does he suck? No one knows, right? Like there's a lot of propaganda when it comes to Vega and a lot of noise that he's bad or that he's weak, but he's ridiculous. He actually have good enough rushdown in my opinion. His neutral is really good. V shift helps him. He have his V skill 1. He already have really good walk speed and movement. He's so cheesy. Like Vega can rob you blind. I know that many people think that Vega have ridiculous robbery. Like Vega have ridiculous robbery in my opinion. So I do think he's a very good character. He just doesn't do that well versus many of these top tier characters, but I do think that he's really good. Next up we are gonna have Shaun Lee. I think Shaun Lee have fallen a lot, and it is unfortunate in my opinion because obviously I love Shaun Lee, and maybe this is just my perspective, and maybe this is more what I said, like tiers are subjective and everyone has their own opinion. The nerf to the standing light kick for Shaun Lee is brutal. It's actually brutal if you play this character. I don't mind that Shaun Lee lost her standing light kick as an anti-air, but there should be an alternative. Now Shaun Lee have a giant blind spot when it comes to anti-airing. If your opponent knows a matchup well, they can empty jump the back heavy kick, so that totally sucks. Like for a character like her to be free to jumps from a certain distance, that is just awful. Another issue of course is the lack of Oki on heavy kick legs, so that getting weaker. That's kinda unfortunate. V shift kinda nullifies a lot of her setups with V trigger 2. So that's kinda unfortunate. I do think she's an okay character still, like you can make Shaun Lee work, but I honestly don't see Shaun Lee doing well in tournaments. I'm sorry, but you know, it is what it is. At least without backup, right? Like maybe with backup, maybe in certain matchups, she still have her good defense, she still have her decent neutral on the ground, but I don't think she is a top tier character anymore. And up next is Cody. Cody is such a weird character for me. Some days I feel like Cody is $1,000,000, and other days I feel like he's the worst character ever. He's a super inconsistent character because he's reliant. You know, I don't want to say luck, but he isn't very consistent. Cody's defense and his lack of a 3-frame and lack of reversal just makes him super vulnerable to getting cheesed, right? Like he's one of the characters who can get cheesed or can get pressure to this easily. His V trigger 2 did get a little bit weaker because of V shift, but you know, it is still a really good option. His neutral is a little bit better. His damage output is kind of ridiculous now. But again, for him to have his really high damage output, you have to be constantly holding level 2 Zhang. And if you're constantly holding level 2 Zhang, you're either not gonna throw your opponent, not gonna V-scale your opponent, or not anti-air your opponent, right? Like you have to give up an option. And if your opponent figures out that you can throw them, it makes your pressure so much weaker. and if they figure out that you can't anti-air, they're gonna jump on you all day, except if you have V-Skill 1, but if you have V-Skill 1, you can't really shake fireballs. So it's just like, there's so many things to Cody where I do think he's still really good, but there's so many limitations to the characters that you will only understand if you actually play him. He's one of these characters, I feel, like if you ask me, and again, maybe this is my bias, which of these characters get, which of this character loses more, the more you know the matchup. And the character, for me, the character that drops the most in the entire game when you know the matchup is Cody. And I actually add that Honda as well. I do think both of these characters, they drop significantly in effectiveness once you know the matchup really well. They can get away with unfamiliarity, but if you know the matchup, they get significantly weaker, in my opinion. Honda kinda have the same issues as Cody. He is not consistent just because of his kit and how he works. He can feel some days like a super unbeatable monster, some days otherwise he doesn't feel that amazing. He does have really high damage output now, especially in the corner, and Honda have some super lopsided matchups, right? Like there are some characters that he totally dominates. Like I can tell you that he probably 7-3 poison, right? But then he loses 7-3 to Sagat. So it's like he does have some really good matchups and some awful matchups, and that's hard to make a character consistent, you know. Up next, in my opinion, is Dan and Kage. Maybe Kage is a little bit better, or maybe they are right around the same place for me. Dan and Kage, I think both of them are really nice. The issue is they both share the same issue actually. Both of them have they both struggle versus zoning, they both struggle to get in. I do think that Dan have stronger mid-screen presence. And currently, the fact that he have an infinite and he can kill you if he gets stunned, and the infinite have been in the game for so long now that I cannot ignore it. Like you can't ignore a character that kills you if you get stunned, right? Like that, you can't really ignore that. I know that so many players will tell you Dan is a lot of work, and because he is Dan, you wanna put him at the bottom of the tiers, but I do think actually this character is actually really good. And Kage is weird because he does struggle in the neutral. His pressure is kinda weakened by V-Shift, but his damage output now, especially if you have V-Trigger 1 and V-Skill 2, his damage output is just stupid. Like he does so much damage now, to the point where, again, even if the matchup is bad, he can kinda fight through it. But it is one of these things where you're kinda always fighting from a disadvantage. In a weird way, Kage is like Zangief or like a grappler character, right? Like he's constantly fighting from a disadvantage, and I don't know, for someone who have that low of HP, I don't know if that's a good position. Next up, and I will have to make an adjustment here, Laura. I do think Laura should be at the top of this A list. Laura is really good character in my opinion. Laura have really good. I do think her neutral is kinda decent. Her damage output is ridiculous. She is weakened a little bit by V-Shift, but it also helps her a little bit. But I don't think it matters for her as much. Like if I had to say Laura, Mika, Zangief, Mika got hit the hardest with V-Shift. Laura got hit a little bit, but she can still kinda cover it. I still think she's still a solid mid-tier character, and her issue, of course, is that her matchup spread against the top tiers is kinda rough, right? Like she loses to Rashid, Kami, probably Zeku, Akuma, Karen, Gill, Julian. I can see her losing to all of these matchups, and that kinda sucks, right? Like you don't wanna have that. Next up, we are gonna have a couple of characters. I do think Ibuki is still she's still a good character. I don't know. A lot of people put Ibuki at like C tier or B tier. She's not a bad character at all. V-Shift did nerf her significantly, in my opinion. I'll say Ibuki and Mika. Like, this is not Mika's placement. I'm just commenting. Both of these characters got the most negatively impacted by V-Shift, I feel. So I do think Ibuki did get affected heavily with V-Shift. Her V-Triggers in particular took a big hit. The V skill 2 took a big hit, so she did get significantly weaker. But she's still okay. Next up here, I'm gonna have Alex, and I'm gonna have Lucia. And both of these characters, again, I do think they are good. Both of them got buffed to be better at what they do, but I'm still not convinced that they are there yet. Alex still have his poor defense. V-Shift did help him a little bit, but I'm not sure if it was enough, right? I think V-Shift did help him a little. I can't say that it hurt him at all. It did help him. Maybe hurt him in regards to storms, but otherwise it did give him an option, and he does have really good damage output now, but he's still really inconsistent. He still have his defensive issues. It does kind of hurt a little bit his pressure, especially when he's doing a lot of these lariat pressure. So he is a little bit weaker, but he's fine. The same with Lucia. Lucia, actually, the most impactful change she got was the sweep change, and just being able to do a little bit more with the EX Fireball kind of helped her a little bit in combos, and the sweep change is actually really nice. But again, one of these characters where I think she needed a little bit more. I think Lucia with a couple of buffs could actually be really good. But she still needs a little bit more, in my opinion. So I do think that kind of concludes the A- tier. Let's now make a B tier, and I'm gonna put Fang there. I'm gonna put Juri. I'm gonna put Ken. I'm gonna put actually Nicole is A-. I actually forgot about Nicole. I feel like always Nicole is a character that you always forget exists, right? Like Nicole, you always forget that he exists. But Nicole is kinda in the same boat as Kage and Dan. These three characters are very similar. All of them have kind of the same issues. You can even say that they are kind of the same character pretty much. They're just different spins on the same character. Obviously, Nicole still have a little bit of versatility. Maybe he is the best of them actually. He does have a little bit more versatility than they do, especially that he have a command grab, but he's stubbier than both of them probably, and his neutral conversions, if he doesn't have charge, isn't as good, but he's still a good character. Nicole is just a character that he is lukewarm, you know, like there's not much to him. It doesn't feel like he can get the job done. Next up we have Ken. I'm gonna put Dulcim at the end of the A- as well. I'm sorry if it's all over the place. It is kind of hard to focus on this, but I do think Dulcim also is an A-. He is a character who is, but at the very end of A-. Like Dulcim, I feel like is at the very end of A-. He is really good still, but he did take some really big hits that will affect him. I don't think V-Shift actually benefits Dulcim at all. It does hurt him in some regards, and the nerfs overall in the long term I think are gonna, they're gonna cripple him a little bit. This tier we're gonna have Zangief, Fang, Juri, Ken, Zangief. I think both four of these characters, all four of them kinda struggle a little bit. They are not so much weaker than the characters in the A-. They do have their good moments, they do have their good matchups, but there are a little bit of a struggle. I do think all four of them are a little bit of struggles. There is quite the good amount of bad matchups that can make their life kinda difficult. And the bottom four, in my opinion, in order: Blanca, Gill, Mika, Nash. And here is why I think all of them are in this order. Blanca, the issue with Blanca is that he doesn't have solid neutral. V-Shift hurt his V-Trigger too, which was like the biggest thing going his way, right? Like the highest aspect of Blanca was the EX Rainbow Ball and the V-Trigger Ball, and V-Shift directly counters them, right? V-Shift is a direct counter to both of them, and that kinda sucks. His neutral is kinda weak. In a game now which is more focused on the neutral, he does poorly versus almost all of the top tiers. That is kind of a struggle. And Gill is kind of the same thing actually. Gill can get a lot of damage. I'm sorry. Gill kinda can get a lot of damage. It's just that the nerfs to V-Shift actually hurt him a lot. Like the V-Trigger 2, especially V-Trigger 2. V-Trigger 2 is very hard to do anything with now thanks to V-Shift. Even V-Trigger 1, when you go for the 50-50 resets, that is a little bit weaker because of V-Shift. He doesn't have a crush counter, so even if you bait the V-Shift, he can't really punish it with much. Because of the distance, of course, and him not having the ability to convert out of the counter hit heavies. So all of that kinda hurts him a lot. Mika is in such a weird spot. Mika got hit so hard by V-Shift. It is kinda ridiculous, honestly, especially the mid-screen presence. There is something that I have to say with Mika, and it is what I personally feel. Maybe I see it wrong, I don't know. Again, it is subjective. I'm simply reflecting on my own experience. When I try to pressure someone with Mika, especially mid-screen, I feel anxious. I feel anxious when I'm trying to pressure my opponent. Out of every character I played a little bit of Rashid, Kami, Zeku, Akuma, I played Colleen, Ryu, a little bit Bison, boy. Like you've seen so many guys, I played and tried so many characters. I feel anxious when I try to pressure someone with Mika. I literally feel afraid because of their V reversals, her neutral sucks, V-Shift, she's very weak to V-Shift mid-screen, the fact that EX Peach is the only answer, that is trash. Even V-Shift hurt her corner pressure because it's reliant on side switch 50-50 mix-ups. You just have to work so hard, and when you really look at the matchup spread, she gets bodied by everyone. Like she loses to Rashid, she loses to Kami, she loses to Zeku, she loses to Akuma, she loses to Karen, does well versus Balrog, loses to Gill, okay versus Julian, okay versus Colleen, loses to Sakura, okay versus Bison, get bodied by Ryu, okay versus Poison, okay versus Sis, get destroyed by Abigail, get destroyed by Sagat. It's like, it's way too much. Like the character, I don't know if Mika have a single good matchup left. I'm not sure if she's have a single good matchup. And that just sucks. And Nash is kind of the same deal. He's a character who does not excel at anything, doesn't really do well at anything. He's just kinda there, you know, he struggles, I don't think V-Shift helped him either. He doesn't chase well after V-Shift. It's like he's one of these characters who he doesn't really do anything, right? They nerfed the sweep, and actually I think out of all characters who had like sweeps that you can't sweep back, Nash probably needed it the most. It was one of his best neutral buttons, and they nerfed it, so overall heavy nerfs to Nash. But I do think these guys, I would say they are C tiers, I wouldn't say like they are D tiers. I do think it will be very hard to actually make it if you're playing one of these fours. You're gonna have some really inconsistent results. That's just my opinion. Anyways, let me know what you think. Again, it is a really subjective thing. You can't really judge every single character and have a really good matchup spread, but this is kind of the ranking of the characters of Street Fighter V as I see it right now. If you have enjoyed this video, please leave a like or a comment, it helps the channel so much. I will be leaving a link to the Patreon page and the Discord server page in the description. Thank you very much for watching and stay safe.